You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston and Chris Trent, episode number 79.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, your hosts, Jody Livingston and Chris Trent.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. If it's your first time checking out the show, welcome. New year, new podcast. Great episode as always. So we're glad you're here. And if you're coming on back, still listening, still putting up with Chris, we appreciate that very much. Maybe you're
the first episode of the year and you're already starting in on me.
No.
You know why? Because you're getting California snooty. That's what that's about.
Is that what that is? Is that what that is? Maybe.
Probably just alienated every California friend we have, but
that's all right. That's all right. We'll forgive you when we're at the beach today. If you enjoy the show, man, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through iTunes or whatever platform you're listening on. That'd be fantastic. And yeah, good show. You can find us all over the place. Not really, but on social media at Jody Livingston, Chris Trent, because we're creative like that. Links and resources be on the show notes page at thelongerhaul.com/episode 079. So you can check all that stuff out. First one of 2019, man.
Yeah. So if you're brand new, just finding us, that's Jody there, and I'm Chris. And we are a couple of youth pastors. We used to live in the same area, but now we don't. Jody lives out in California. I live here in the Atlanta area, and we both do youth ministry. I primarily focus on middle school students. Jody primarily focuses on high school students now. And we just both have been doing it a while. A little bit. It's like ancient now. But anyway, but yeah, we dig this stuff. How you doing, man? You good?
Yeah, I'm good. I am.
How was Christmas in California?
It's pretty warm. It's good. I'm joking earlier, but yeah, we went it's pretty chill. I mean, we had our Christmas services here, so that was new and different.
Yeah. And
then we always kind of as a family celebrate Christmas, just us. We stopped doing the travel thing. And so, so we did that. And then the next day we went down to the beach and hung out for a bit, and it's been a good break with the kids and just kind of still getting unpacked a bit. But how about you?
It was good. We took a little trip down to the land of the mouse, and Wendy,
I saw that.
Wendy does that Disney travel stuff, so we went down and visited what's our home away from home, and hung out there for a little bit. It is. I'm just being honest. Which was fun, but we weren't there over Christmas. We came back, and then I had to be back for Christmas Eve as well.
Yeah,
that's a big thing around here. And then a couple days after that, went back on the road and visited my family in Florida, but the Panhandle. And so good times though.
Cool.
Glad to be back. It was good to get back in the office this week.
Yeah, I was itching.
A little overwhelming. It took me a couple days to kind of dig out of the hole. And in light of all the changes, listen to the last episode that's going on, just a little overwhelming, but in a good way. So I'm digging it. It's a lot of fun. So
cool. Well, timely topic today, as it's the new year, and everybody sets out to figure out what they do wrong in life and how they're going to make it better.
That's funny. So the thought here is that we could do, a setting goals and evaluations type podcast, and we could talk about that, and we'll dig into that in a minute. But it comes out of the fact that it's New Year's, and so many people set, New Year's resolutions. Now, do you, Jody, typically set New Year's resolutions? When was the last time you set a New Year's resolution?
I don't know that I ever did. When I worked at the Y as a teen director, this is the time of year you couldn't find a parking spot. We'd literally park like 2 buildings over, and they were running shuttles to get us to the building because everybody was there to lose weight and get healthy. And then, in 2 or 3 weeks, we'd be parking right back up front where we normally did.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a big resolution kind of guy. Now, what I do often do is like a reading list. I'll put together like a list or something like that. Like, here's this thing is I'm going to read, but I don't. Plus, I don't really like physical activity unless I have to.
Riding your motorcycle is a physical activity.
No, like I'll do outdoorsy stuff. I like hiking, camping, mountain biking, riding my motorcycle. But I like running. No, not unless somebody's chasing me. And working out just for the sake of working out. Maybe one day, but so far in life, no.
Which is probably terrible advice for our listeners.
Yeah, so that's a good thing we're not talking about that today. We should have somebody on at some point to talk about healthy living.
We could do an entire episode on episodes that we'll never record, and one of them will be how to live a healthy lifestyle, because you and I probably are not huge on that, but not because we don't think it's good. We just
somebody listening right now is like,
yeah, we should bring them on.
It's not that I'm against it. I'm all for it.
I'm just terrible at it.
I'm just not good at it, and I'm lazy when it comes to that.
So the whole idea though is I'm with you. I don't really set resolutions per se either, but I think I naturally do some self evaluating and kind of some that leads to goal setting. And so not just in life, but in the main thing I do, which is career, as well, like
sure.
Ministry job part. And so I think that's what this episode will come out of. It'll come out of for both of us. But we've learned that's important about that, So yeah, you ready to jump in?
Yeah, we hey, before we do though,
sponsor.
We got some great folks we love over at YM360.
I love them. I really do. I just talked with Roger Davis yesterday again. Keep in touch.
He's a good guy. Yeah. So if you are needing, especially since it's first of the year, I feel like this is kind of one of those things you start looking for curriculum stuff, or maybe you're still thinking camp things or whatever. YM360.
D-Now is a big thing, right?
D-Now is a big thing. Yeah, a lot of folks do. D-Now.
Yeah, a lot of folks do those in the spring, and they've got a really exhaustive list of options now as far as D-Now curriculum goes.
Or maybe you're putting together your own little reading list, and you need a great book, and you can buy one of those books written by someone I know at ym360.com. And so that's a decent little book on longevity.
They do have it. Yep.
So anyway, head over to ym360.com. Check out all that stuff. Make sure you save money, like 20%.
Promo code.
The promo code Longer Haul.
Yep. It's good.
I haven't really heard from anybody who's tried to use it for camp.
You can't use it for camp.
I just want to know if somebody tried it
for camp. Just consider it. I'm telling you, it's good.
It's true. That's true. So ym360.com. Make sure you use the promo code Longer Haul. Save yourself 20%. And man, we're grateful for those guys. I hope as a listener you hear our heart in that. First of all, this isn't free, so them helping us out is awesome. And free for us to do, at least. So that's huge. But more than that, we just love those guys, appreciate what they do and how they do it, the approach they take, and the fact that they all are serving in the local church and love students and serving students. Beyond sponsorship, I think we would call those guys friends. And so it's easy for us to steer people that direction when we believe so strongly in what they do.
Yep, no doubt about it.
So cool. All right, we ready? We'll jump in?
Ready. 100%.
Here we go.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
So when we think about evaluating and like setting goals and evaluation, whichever way you want to think about that. So Jody, the question I have for you, and we've kind of talked about it, but I'm not asking you this specifically in this way, is how big of a deal would you say a willingness to do serious evaluation and goal setting has impacted you being able to do youth ministry for the longer haul? It's a long question. Did you get it all?
No. So I think it's huge. I think if you don't do it, I'm sure there are people that manage to do ministry for a long time without it, but I don't know how effective they are. I think it's huge for your effectiveness. I think it's huge for like just staying encouraged. I think it's helpful in kind of managing expectation and burnout. And then that's just personally, right? And then aside from that, just improving on your effectiveness in your ministry is huge. I don't know many that have done it for a long time that don't seriously take self-evaluation and ministry evaluation serious. I certainly don't think I would have been able to last in ministry had I not. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you 100%. I think what's bouncing around in my mind right now is whether or not it's intuitive for someone, like it's a natural makeup part of their DNA, that they're just wired in a way where they're trying to improve as a leader, improve in every area of their life, whatever that might be. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to evaluate what you're doing, how you're performing, use whatever word you want. And then you also have to be willing to set goals and make action steps to get, to those goals. I would say that folks that I know that have gotten out of youth ministry over time, that sometimes it's because they seemingly get in a rut and they can't quite break out of that. And I think that it would be fair to say that one of the causes of that is that they're not doing anything to continue to grow. And so I think the danger is, and again, we say this all the time. So we're talking about the longer haul. Okay. So we say the longer haul as a career. Hey, if you want to do youth ministry into your 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, that's one thing. But when you think about longer haul at the current church that you're serving at, well, is it possible that one of the reasons why we have such a high turnover, like you see all these statistics, like where guys go for like 2 years and then they go to another church and then they're there 2 years, is that something happens there and they're not really changing much. They're not growing and evaluating and making improvements where they need. So they've got a good couple of years in them, but then they hit that wall,
Yeah.
So I think that's where you have to be willing to dig in and evaluate.
Yeah, I think, especially talk about that turnover, right? That 2 to 3 years and then someplace else 2 to 3 years. And you can do that and not grow and basically do the same thing over and over and over. But at a certain point, I think there's a personal frustration that comes because you never really seem to move beyond. And I do think like that's a good point that you bring as far as like that goal setting and evaluation being somewhat intuitive for some and maybe not as much for others. I definitely think personally, I tend to be a pretty driven person. And so I'm always wanting to be better, improve. How do we become more effective in what we're doing or what I'm doing personally? I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, so I'm an achiever. And I don't really know what all that means, except that everyone tells me that I'm a 3. And I am. I took the little test thing. And then people start saying like, what are you, a wing this or something, feather that? And I don't know what all that means. But I do know that I do have a strong desire to constantly improve and be more effective. And that's personally and in ministry. And so as a result, I'm always trying to learn and grow. And I think for me, that really has kind of always been rather intuitive.
Yeah, I think it is for me as well, so folks that might be listening, that they're sitting there going, yeah, that's not really the way I'm wired. Well, I don't think that, I can just speak for myself. I don't think that means you're not wired correctly.
Right.
I don't think it's wrong for you to be a little more laid back, go with the flow. But just like I know, though, as a person who is extremely motivated to plan, there are times where I have to intentionally be laid back and go with the flow. Like I have to create that in my life because it's important sometimes to be that way. I think a person who is wired that way sometimes needs to be willing to go, yeah, I probably need to do some evaluating. I probably need to
Right.
do some goal setting, because I think folks over time, if you don't know where you're going and you don't know what you're doing and you're not able to communicate that clearly, you'll just kind of keep doing the same old, over and over again. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably not good. So I wrote down some things maybe to kind of get us moving. Some things that I've found useful, that can kind of get us thinking about this a little bit, digging in a little deeper for folks that are good at this and folks that aren't great at it. Here's some ideas for you as you're thinking about doing youth ministry for the longer haul, and what are some ways you might could do some evaluating and some goal setting. I think the key is to start with the big picture, though. That's what I wrote down first. Is I think in a moment where you're really going to do some evaluating, you got to be willing to look at the overall scope of your youth ministry. And that might mean that you literally sit down, with your calendar, and you jot down, map out however you're wired, an overall look at what all have you done this year. What are the programs you've done, the big events you've done? What is your weekly programming? And then I think just starting to dig into each one of those, and kind of, again, it's all about how you're wired. I don't really sit there and rate each one, so it's not like I rate each, but I just think of each. I have to put each one into a category and go, okay, Sunday mornings, how is that going? What are some things that are going well? What are some things that are not going well? So I have to take each individual area that I'm responsible for, that I can shape and mold, and I have to be willing to evaluate it. And with that, it's important, just as a side note, and if you've listened much at all to our podcast, you've heard me say this 1,000 times, but a do this next year list for your programming things is really important. And I would even say a do this next week list is important as well, meaning that when you're doing your weekly activities, and you notice something on a Sunday morning that needs to be improved, that you write it down, send yourself an email, make a note, set a reminder, whatever works for you, that you do something that, because that's you evaluating, that you saying, okay, we keep running out of chairs every Wednesday night and having to set up chairs next week. We don't want to keep doing that over. You want to do something to fix that, so do this next year list, or do this next week. Or right. Tomorrow list is huge, with that. So are you a fan? Do you do big picture thinking there?
Yeah. So, I always kind of start with the end in mind. And so just to be clear, we're talking more here on like ministry wise, not necessarily personal, although there's some bleed over, right? Is that what we're thinking?
There's some bleed over. Yeah, no doubt. And that's a good point of clarification there, Jody. I'm really thinking about youth ministry, me as a youth pastor, but there is bleed over, no doubt. And I think sometimes, I don't think you can separate the two.
No, sure.
I think sometimes you're going to have to go, oh, so I probably really need to do a better job reading more this year, because that will make me a better youth pastor, whatever,
right.
Or I need to read. Or it may end up being a thing where it's like, man, I'm really struggling in parent ministry right now. So I'm going to try to read some articles on parent ministry, or read, you see, so it's, listen to a podcast, whatever. So I think the two are connected,
right.
For sure there. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, for me, definitely I start big picture and then kind of work my way back. And what I would say is, and I wrote this down as well, is like, I think it's important to have clear goals and metrics. And so whatever that looks like, and then you can measure against that. So even like what you're saying, like I think what clear goals and metrics do when it comes to evaluating is it gives you something and some direction into what and how you're evaluating. So how do you know when something needs to be changed or when something is or isn't being effective? And that's where having like that big picture goal of what you're trying to accomplish is important. And so if you don't have that, if your goal every week is just that kids will show up and have a good time and learn a little bit, well, that's good. It's not that that's bad, but where does that lead you down the longer haul of your ministry? And so kind of starting big picture and even down the line, like I've talked about this, if you go back to episode 35, we talk a little bit about that. But for me, like I generally start 5 years out and then from there kind of work backwards. Okay, if this is where we want to be in 5 years, big picture, what can I reasonably accomplish in 3 and then in 2? And then what does that look like 6 months from now?
And I would encourage our listeners right now not to miss what Jody is saying. You're speaking like a guy who is thinking about longevity. Because people who think longevity, they do think 5 years down the road. And I think too often one of the struggles youth pastors have is they get into their church and they're just like survive. One day at a time, whenever in all actuality, you need to be able to look ahead and go, hey, where am I headed? Maybe middle school and high schoolers are combined right now. And deep down inside, I know that we might be better if they're split. But if I did that right now, I'd get fired. But maybe in 3 years, I could pull that off. It's those type of big things. But it's also
so like in that scenario, for example, if you knew,
Jody, you're speaking like somebody who believes you're going to be at the same place 5 years from now, and that's good. Good. Yeah.
So like what that would look like, for example, in that scenario we were talking about, where you've got them together combined, and you want to split. It's more than just saying, hey, 5 years from now we want to be separate, or 3 years from now we want to be separate. That becomes the goal. And then you have to work backwards and map out how you bring that about, right? Like where are the small things, the steps you need to take? Maybe you start by doing some events separately and recruiting, so I think that's what I'm saying. Big picture is helpful. The other thing I'll say is when you're setting those goals and those metrics, I think it's important that they are both realistic in expectation, but they also require some reach beyond what would be, normal. They need to be something you're striving for. So don't just go easy and take something that you can do, but swing at the fences a little bit. But
sure.
But somewhat realistic too. You don't want to be like, if you're in a church and you've got 15 kids coming, and in 5 years you say, man, I'd love to be at 30. Well, that's okay. But if you're sitting there saying, I'm 15 kids and in 5 years I want to be at 200, that's a little much because there's a lot that has to happen, right? That's beyond your control in that. Like the church is going to have to also grow in that same point. So I think, reach, swing big, dream big, but make sure that, I think some generally for my list, I have some that I know are attainable and some that are more aspirational. Like I hope we could do this.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm gonna work towards both as hard as we can, but they're not all the same.
Yeah. No doubt. I do think a part of this process could be meeting with a team of folks as well, or seeking some wise counsel. Now, depending on the size of your church and how many volunteers you have, please hear that. This is important what I'm saying right here. Not to get yourself in a mess. If you're in a youth group setting where you only have 5 volunteers, you picking only 2 of those volunteers may not go over well with the whole team of volunteers. If you're in a situation where you have 50 volunteers and you pull together 6 as kind of a coaching group for yourself, you can get away with that easier.
Sure.
Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you're in a small rural church somewhere or just a small smaller church period, it may be important just to bring, or at least invite all of those people to the table so that nobody feels left out. That said, I'm not proposing that you literally have to ask them everything. But I think going into it would just say, hey, I would just love to evaluate, how we're doing and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on that? And being clear, I can't promise I'm going to do everything everybody said, but I would just love to get everybody's input. Now, the way I do that is I literally have a group of 6 people that I call them coaches, and they're sort of like my think tank almost, if you will. And I strategically plan meetings with them after big events or after things so that we can purposely evaluate those things. So after D Now in November, we met intentionally for the purpose of saying, hey, any thoughts on D Now? I want to get y'all's input on this as well. Now, we evaluated the heck out of our D Now, but I wanted to get their input as well, But please hear also what I'm saying here. It's not just a thing that you do one time in January, but part of that evaluation is an ongoing creating systems in your ministry where you can do ongoing evaluation.
Yeah.
And then maybe in January, sometime this year, whatever, and maybe, and to be fair, you could shift this whole line of thinking to the middle of the summer before the new school year starts and think of that as the first, your new year as well. I mean, I think some people probably think that way.
Yeah.
But getting those people around you that can speak honestly, that you trust, that's huge.
Yeah. I think the key thing in what you're saying is that there's 2 things I hear you saying that I think are really important. And I hope those listening hear. One is that the time that you do it doesn't matter, right? So whatever falls best in the rhythm of your year.
Yes.
And the other thing is it can't be a one and done kind of thing. It really needs to be a consistency of evaluation that happens throughout the year. I think the danger is if you wait and you just have one time where you sit down and evaluate, one, a lot of things are going to get lost and forgotten. And 2, there's going to be so much to try to talk through that you're not going to really be able to accomplish a lot. So I love the idea of finding those moments, particularly after large events, where you're going to kind of evaluate those. And then if you're doing that consistently throughout the year, and then you decide that you want to do this, which I think is helpful, kind of right before you start into whatever's new, whether that be January or before the school year, or at the end of the school year, that's a little more manageable and helpful. And so I'm with you. One of the ways I've done this in the past is inviting parents onto like a parent leadership team.
Yep.
And kind of giving them charge.
That's another good way to do it as well.
To plan and evaluate. And that I've talked about that before. And that's been amazingly helpful for me over the years because they bring perspective that I often, particularly before I was a parent of kids in the group, perspective I didn't often think of or consider. And so that's always been really, really helpful. But I think finding that outside perspective is good.
Keep this asterisk in mind, though, as Jody's saying that, as I'm saying that, talking about whether it be parents or whether it be youth leaders that you're bringing in. Tell me if you agree with this, Jody. This is kind of an asterisk, kind of a warning, if you will. You have to be willing to really listen to these people and be willing to act on some of what they're saying, at least some of what they're saying. And I would say and if you really are not going to act on something somebody recommends or whatever, you might want to personally just make sure that they know that you've heard them, but you don't feel like you're able to act on it right now.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's important that if you're going to bring people together, you got to be willing to act on the stuff that they're talking about.
Yeah. Otherwise they're just going to be mad. Frustrated.
You don't want to, then you're going to create just a gripe fest over and over again. That's what you want to be careful to avoid. You don't want to create a group of people that, oh, hey, tell me everything I'm doing wrong. No. We're in this together. Use words like we.
Yeah.
How did
Us.
we do at D Now? What did y'all like about it? Very intentionally, questions.
Well, I think too, that's where having those clear goals and metrics come in, because it kind of gives you some rails
Yeah, sure.
for everybody. So if they're coming with a great idea, I mean, it might be a fantastic idea. It's just not reasonable to do right now. That's more of a 3-year out or a 5-year out, or even going into those large events, like establishing ahead of time. Here's our big goals and takeaways that we hope to see in this event. Then when you come back afterwards, you can say, okay, here's what we were trying to aim to do.
Yeah.
How well do we do at accomplishing these?
It's good.
So
a couple of questions there, just to make, if you're not intuitively good at this too, and this is somewhat simplistic, but a couple key questions to jot down if you're thinking about maybe implementing some of this is, one, both asking yourself or potentially others, what are you doing well?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just when I look at my overall year, going back to how we started, what's the big picture? When I look at over the all year, what's going really well, and celebrate that. But then also but what needs improvement? What are some things that we are, missing, that we need to work on or whatever, and then what you talked about earlier, Jody, is, and then whatever you come up with in all of that, this part is huge right here. You have to create obtainable goals, and then you have to schedule them.
Yeah.
You have to come up with a workable plan that will help you move towards them. Because if not, you'll just say, oh yeah, that'd be really awesome one day. And you'll never actually do anything, about that. And a lot of that is you learning how to be a good leader and having conversations with people. Go back to that earlier example, I gave of, let's say you are middle school and high school and you're like, man, it'd be really awesome if we could do some things separate, whatever, right? Well, you've got to start to create a culture and have conversations with people slowly over time and get buy-in in order to make that happen. And then you have to actually plan a small separate thing at some point, for middle school and high school. That would be the way I'd implement that. Or let's say, forget that one. Let's say that you look and you go, man, it would be an amazing thing for our group to take an international mission trip. We've never done that, and that would be amazing to pull that off. Well, you can't just decide in January of 2019 that the summer of July, or this summer, July of 2019, maybe 6 months from now, you can't just walk into your people and go, hey, I've decided we're all going to Jamaica. You know? I mean, you can.
I'll go with you to Jamaica.
And you might could pull it off, but it's going to cost you a lot in terms of frustrations. Again, that's one of those big, you got to so you have to set these obtainable goals to get to that point.
And that's even, I would say, like on that, especially like consider your current context. Like if you're not really doing missions stuff, trips at all, then your first one probably shouldn't be overseas. You want to walk them to that. So maybe you go someplace local.
It's figuring out, that's where I want to go. What are some things that could get me there?
Yeah.
And it's asking that question, and that part's huge. So here's a question for you, Jody.
Okay.
In part of the evaluation, we talked about maybe asking yourself, you're sitting down, you're dreaming, you're getting by yourself. Okay, that's one thing. We talked about maybe seeking some wise counsel, some parents. What about asking kids? What do you think about that? Students.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of that. Sometimes I will.
You and I are so much alike sometimes.
Because here's the thing, like,
we're youth pastors, Jody. We have to care what kids think.
No, we don't. I mean, I don't care what any of these kids think. I'm kidding, sort of. I think, at the end of the day, we're hopefully, when I think about leading a student ministry, particularly, right, and leading students, I'm trying to call them to something that's beyond them and something that is bigger than all of us. And if I'm the one leading the helm on that, hopefully I'm doing that through some clear vision. Now, I'm going to probably have some specific goals in mind of what I want to see the Lord do in their life and what I want to see us as a ministry accomplish. I think there are places, though, where you can involve students.
Yeah,
but it's not, what do you think we should do? It's more
That's
of
where-
like,
That's
hey,
where I feel. So
here's what I'd like us to do.
Yeah.
What are some thoughts on how we might do that or something like that?
Yeah. I think you need to pay attention to what kids think. If you bring in a band for your event, and obviously, there's this huge, like, everybody doesn't like them, well, you need to pay attention to that and not keep it,
for sure.
and not bring them back over and over again kind of stuff, but when it comes to big picture, where we're headed in that context, not, hey, we all went to that pizza place instead of that pizza place, but big picture stuff. I think I think bringing. Well, I'd literally ask kids ? I put not so much,
Right.
And because I'm really not. I care, but I'm also a little bit. I'm a little bit. It's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit of an Apple junkie, though. In the sense that,
where are you going now? I have no idea what.
Well, this is going to make sense to you. I mean, one of the things Apple has done really well, minus the whole headphone jack thing, is
for real.
But they basically have said from the start, we're going to tell you what you need.
Yeah.
And this is going to be, some people are going to jump off on this. If you're a tech junkie right now, you're going to forget everything else I'm saying, and you're just going to want to argue me because you think that your Android's so much better, whatever. I'm not opposed to Android.
They all do the same thing. They're all doing the same thing.
Yeah, kind of know. But here's what I'm saying though. Apple, one of the reasons why what they've done this works so well, and this can't be argued. I mean, this is true, is that they have looked at their customers and said, we're going to give you the things that we feel like. That doesn't mean they always get it right. I think the headphone jack currently is still a debatable example of that, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that they've done that we didn't really know we needed that. But you know what? We actually did, and
yeah.
So we could get all tech geeky about it. There's all kinds of examples I could give in that.
Well, we can't.
Read some articles there.
You can.
Yeah.
I'll let him be mad at you.
Yeah. Okay. But here's what I'm saying though. I think there's some of that. Now you can't go headstrong, and I'll listen to people. That's not what I'm saying. Don't run with that too much. And
hopefully we just said that, right? Like, invite people in.
I hope.
I think maybe it comes down to this.
I'm talking about with kids.
We tell them,
hey, should we go to the beach or should we go to the mountains for camp? Well, maybe in your mind you're like, taking my current group to the beach is not a good idea because they're a little too crazy. I think I need a more enclosed campus type setting. Don't ask.
Right.
Yeah,
I think the way I would say that is we kind of define the what we're trying to accomplish, and to a large extent, and maybe even a larger extent, why we're trying to accomplish that. If we're going to involve students, it maybe comes into the how we go about doing that. But even then, like, have a good idea of where you're heading, and just be selective, be wise in that. Yeah, especially if you're thinking long term, because look, if you're thinking longevity, which is what we're trying to convince you to do, you're going to be there longer than they are. And so if you're constantly making decisions based off of what your current group of students thinks, you're never going to be able to establish any consistency of anything, because you're going to be changing everything you do all the time. And I've seen that play out in other ministries and other guys that I know. It's just not effective. It's not effective at all.
What do y'all want to do a Bible study on? Revelation. We want to do a Bible study on Revelation.
Song of Solomon.
I mean, it's at some point you just have to go,
that's awesome. I love the book of Revelation, but let's talk about the Gospels and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So I wrote this down. I said, when we're talking about evaluating, right? I wrote, ask why a lot. Like, why do we do this? And even if it's like, that's something that's easy for me to do right now because I'm in a brand new context. And everything, I'm evaluating everything just because I'm trying to understand why we do what we do. But even prior to this, almost 9 years in, I was still finding myself asking why. Why do we do this? Why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing this event? Why do we do the order of service this way? And then I think you follow that with the how. Right? Why do we do it this way? And then if you feel like, well, we don't know why we do it this way, or it's not really super effective this way, then you figure out, okay, well, then how do we need to do it? And I think even where you were saying earlier, where you're kind of evaluating maybe the week to week things, even like maybe that's where that comes in to play a lot, is in those smaller things as well that often get forgotten. Because those week to week things, we can easily get in just a rut. Like, we just do this every week, same order of service, same whatever, same. And maybe it's not really working, it's not accomplishing much, but we never really stopped to inventory and evaluate that. Like, is this really being effective? Because the larger events can certainly take more of our time. The other thing you said that I really like is you said to stop and like evaluate the things that are going well. And I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I hear a lot about this in regards to personal growth, but I don't know that I've ever heard anybody really talk about this in ministry. I think a lot of times when it comes to personal growth, we spend a lot of our time trying to improve our weaknesses rather than becoming more effective in our strengths. And I think to a certain extent that can also apply to our ministries. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying if you really, really suck at something, you shouldn't try to improve that. But I think if you spend all of your time trying to be better at what you're not good at, I don't know how effective you are at anything. You just kind of become lukewarm at everything. Go Jesus, Juke. And not really amazing at anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I agree with that, Jody. I big time, because I try to do that. You know, if I were to list, gosh, how do I say this without it sounding like I'm? Hopefully, this comes across as self-aware and not prideful. So I'm good at administration. I'm good at planning, and I'm pretty decent on stage. Maybe probably a little better than decent as far as being a communicator goes with teenagers. I think that's fair to say, considering I've been doing it so long or whatever, right? That said, I constantly evaluate all of those things.
Sure. Yes.
And when I look at my life and I'm going, okay, well, these things are going pretty well. I feel like I'm still connecting pretty well with teenagers when I teach. I feel like I'm still planning pretty well as a, making, whatever program we're planning or event we're doing, But that said, I still evaluate those things because that's kind of where my bread and butter is, so I want to even be, so like, I love the idea at even, at 48 years old, I love the idea of even getting better at communicating than I am now.
Yeah.
Because I know that even though I'm pretty decent at it, I know I could be better, and I think that's huge. I think it's very important. That's where that comes from for me.
Yeah. And I think you can, if you're not careful, you can get really lazy and pick up some bad habits and take for granted what you do well as well. And so I think,
well, you can rest on your success and again, not continue to, improve and get better and better and better, Yeah. And I tell you, the longer you do this, the harder it gets to do that as well, because it won't, assuming that you don't go online and buy all of your messages.
Yeah.
And that you're writing them yourself, over time, you're going to build up quite the library of lessons. And then before you know it, it's going to be rare that you're teaching on something that you've not taught before. And so you're going to have to be super intentional to keep growing and readdressing those things, and not assuming that the message you wrote 5 years ago is enough, that again, it's just, it's a mindset.
Yep. I like it. And I think too, like, I think it's a fine line between pursuing excellence and health sometimes, in the sense of like, we want to do everything to the best of our ability, and we'd love for everything to be done with excellence. But sometimes it's just important to be healthy. So if you've got areas that you just really suck at, don't worry about making those maybe as good as other areas that you're just naturally better at. Just make sure you're healthy in those areas. You're not deficient in those. And so improve in those.
Yeah, man.
But man, like, God's gifted you and given you certain strengths, and your ministry probably carries with it certain qualities and strengths given your context. And that's totally okay to be that way. And I would just say, own those, figure out what those things are and own them. And,
well, in minute and two, and this is, we're kind of shooting from the hip now at this point, but what you just said also made me think of this, Jody. I think part of the evaluation process is also you not just personally saying, hey, the good and the bad, where do I need to improve? What am I also doing great? But I think a fair challenge, and I do this, is what's the best thing you do every year? Like, what is the best, when you think of your youth ministry, both weekly and yearly, what is the best thing? So if you ask me that question, you'd say, Chris, what is the number one thing, like your favorite, where you feel like the greatest? I would say our mission trip to Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
Here's what's interesting, Jody, not kidding you. Then if you asked me, I'm pulling the curtain back. If you asked me, of all of the events you do, what event ends up with the longest do this next year list? Want to guess which one it is? It's Dallas.
Yeah.
And it's the best thing we do. But because I don't want to lose the momentum that I have there, and because I want to make sure that it stays relevant and we keep digging in. So I would challenge anybody, whatever it is, that thing that just people just love, man, it's so good. Be willing to go, okay, but where else can we improve? And not rest on the success.
No, that's good.
Yep.
That's good. Yeah, we're kind of right now. I mean, like I said, we're hardcore into just evaluating things, and it's a never-ending process. There's a few things that I think are constant in life, but particularly in student ministry. And since it's a youth ministry podcast, we'll talk about those. One is recruiting. We've talked about that endlessly on this podcast. I think you're always recruiting, and two is you're always evaluating. And that's just how you continue to get better and more effective and accomplish things. I think, and I think I said this earlier, but if not, I'll say it now. And if I were going to say anything to somebody listening, and I want you to hear something, it's this: you have to define that big picture goal and what you're striving at. Because if you can't say, this is where we want to be in whatever 5 years or 3 years, you are going to get yourself in so much trouble, or you're never going to know what you're really aiming at. And I just think that's the best thing that I think I've ever learned to do. If you were to say to me, what's the one thing that's helped you like achieve longevity outside of like faithfulness and my own personal walk, but like just practically in ministry, I would say it's being able to set long-term goals and build and work toward accomplishing those. Because here's a great example. We had this conversation this week with our team. Is like one of the girls on our team brought up something that just drives her crazy that happens right now. And it's not a major thing, but it's a big deal. And it bugs the absolute snot out of me. And I've only been here a few weeks, but it's not something that I can go and like, we can change now. That's like, we're going to have to build a culture that turns that tide. And that's going to take, a year or two. But if we don't acknowledge that off the front, we go in guns blazing, and all of a sudden we're changing this and changing that and demanding this and demanding that, we're gonna implode, and something that maybe wasn't a huge, like, major deal all of a sudden becomes one, and not in a positive sense. And so I would really challenge you, if you're listening and you don't do that currently, just to sit down and make a list of, where do you want to be? What do you want things to look like? What are the characteristics and qualities you want to be producing in your students when they leave your ministry? And then how do you build those in? How do you get to that? Where do you want to be in 5, 3, 2, 1, 6 months? What does that look like for you?
Good stuff. Well, good, man. Well, friends, I hope everybody that's listening, I hope you're doing well, and be encouraged. Don't let this overwhelm you. It is okay to take one day at a time. But I think for you to strive to be great at what you do is okay. And it's
absolutely. I'll say this too. Hey, if you're listening to this while you're working out or on the treadmill, thanks for not quitting because you're working out and Chris was slamming it earlier.
That's real funny.
Thanks for staying the course.
Yep. All right. Well, we got a fun year planned, man. Lots of good things coming up. It's going to be good.
Absolutely. Be sure to head over to the show notes page, thelongerhaul.com/episode 079 for links we mentioned. And of course, over to YM360. Check out those guys. Use that promo code LONGERHAUL. Save yourself 20%. And I think that's it. We'll see you in the next episode. Yeah?
Sounds great, man. Take care, everybody. Cool. Happy New Year.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.